Good morning. All right, let's jump right into it since it's a little bit late. So thank you for joining in. Today I am going to introduce you to the philosophy of Advaita. It's a philosophy with truths similar to those underlying many religions, even though Advaita is actually one of the branches of Hinduism. Now, whether it be the ideas expressed in Sufism or the intellectual branch of Islam, or Taoism, or from Madhyamika, and you can look that one up, or Zen Buddhism, or the more esoteric of Christian doctrines such as the Gospel of St. Thomas, or A Course in Miracles, we find similar truth within each one of these religions and philosophies. Most often, however, although the truth is present, it was and is usually surrounded by ritual, or in the past, deliberately hidden by priests for their own purposes. Advaita, the philosophy of Advaita, and A Course in Miracles are not religions and therefore do not have churches or priests and thus no rituals. So they're pretty clean, they're pretty pure. Advaita is an extremely simple philosophy summed up in its Sanskrit name, which is composed of two words. The first letter, which is A, meaning not, and the second part, Dvaita, means two. Simply, Advaita means there are not two things. In other words, it is a non-dualistic philosophy that teaches that the only reality is God, and everything else is not real. And for those of you who have studied or begun to look into A Course in Miracles, it's the same similar philosophy. The only difference between the two is that Advaita is a non-Christian based philosophy that would appeal to the vast majority of the population of the planet and that's not Christian, while A Course in Miracles would theoretically appeal to a Christian base, although most Christians will not travel outside the boundaries of the religious books. Now, to give you a flavor of Advaita, our parents have told us much. Schools and universities have added to and revised this. We ourselves have read lots of books containing other people's ideas, and the media tells us all sorts of rubbish every day, from news to advertising to programming. Some would say not to accept anyone's ideas or opinions until conscious and dispassionate reason and discrimination of the material presented has been exercised. Others go so far as to say we should not trust our own thoughts, as thinking is a most dangerous pastime and should be avoided if at all possible. And although that is somewhat humorous, to me at least, I am not being facetious in saying that that last piece about thinking, and could even provide research that verifies that thinking is very overrated because it puts you into high beta. But one reason I'm going to mention now that thinking is dangerous is because we have a built-in tendency to believe most anything that appeals to us emotionally. So with that said, I'm going to further add to the information stored in your head, and it's all from the Advaita philosophy. The first thing is we are not the body. Now, some of you have heard me say that a lot as I've taught my yoga classes, but this is one of the first tenets of Advaita. The most common belief in this world is that we are a body, and this body harbors a separate I. Not I, either one or both, but I am. Many believe that I am born in a body and I die when the body dies. Yet logic and common sense states that we have a body rather than we are a body. We know the body is only fluids and chemicals and cannot really be what or who we are. Ultimately, the body is nothing but food and fluids, no? Well, how heavy is the body at birth? If you still insist on this is who I am, how heavy is the body at birth and how heavy is it now? How did the body gain substance? From the books you read? The multiplication tables you memorized? Working out, perhaps? And some of us may say, yeah, it's from working out. I don't think so. Materially speaking, there can be no argument that the body is what you put into it. There is nowhere else from which this added weight could have come. So how are we able to make such a clearly unreasonable conclusion that we are the body? The answer lies in the way we think and feel. We observe a pain in the head, and so we say, I have a headache. If we are not adept in the water, we say, I cannot swim. We say, I am a man or a woman. I am smart. I am a runner. I am a construction worker, or I am a teacher, and so on. Some people tend to associate body parts with who they are. If intellectual, someone may point to their head if asked where that which they think of as themselves is located. Others point to their heart. Most people I know put their hand on their chest and they say, here I am. But this is not to say that one is the heart or the brain. Common sense tells us that whatever we are is unaffected by body parts. For instance, when we cut our hair or our nails, we do not feel like we've lost any body parts. Even those who have limbs removed still feel themselves to be the same people. Beethoven was still himself, perhaps more so after he went deaf. So at what point did we come into existence? Upon emergence from the birth canal? In the 7th month while in the womb? Upon conception, perhaps? Maybe while an egg or a sperm? But are not all of these simply food as well? Clearly we cannot be these. And all of this seems like common sense to us as we hear this, but we still say things, and I'll get to that. What about our genes? Our DNA, not the ones on your legs. Our DNA is simply a set of instructions for converting that which is ingested into parts of value to the physical body, which at a later time are rid by the body due to their uselessness. Though there is an enormous amount of intelligence invested in these processes, there is nothing there that we can call I. So every time we utter unconscious statements such as, I am happy, or I have a headache, or I anything in reference to the physical body, remember it's just a phrase we have ignorantly and unconsciously adopted that means absolutely nothing and has no bearing whatsoever in reality. Isn't that fun to think about? So next, we are not the mind. Once we see through the initial illusion about the body, the next port of call is to think we are the mind. So let me ask, how often do you change your mind? I could stop right there with that argument, and that would be enough. So I could stop there and say that since we have all changed our mind, then we can't be the mind because it changes all the time. Our true self, or higher self, is changeless. So how often do we change our mind? As a child, it's normal to have what would be viewed as quite naive ideas about the world, which, by the way, may be more closely aligned with reality with a capital R than adult ideas are. As we are educated, our outlook changes. One would say matures. As we gain more information and are suspected of being intelligent, we develop beliefs. But remember that beliefs are only strongly held opinions held over a long period of time. And those beliefs can change if a well-reasoned argument is presented. So again, I ask, can we be the mind? A mind that changes all the time. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of who we are is our personality. Some people are outgoing, others incoming. We have names for these personalities. We call them extroverts and introverts. For many, these personality traits seem to be fixed for a lifetime, and thus we would believe that who we are right now is our real self. But we know that many introverts have learned to become outgoing in certain situations, and very outgoing people have learned to tone it down and actually go inside. So clearly we cannot be our labeled personality traits, as they too change. What about thinking and the discriminative ability? Do we still think that we are the mind when our thoughts go from one thing to another to the tune of 65,000 thoughts on average every single day of our lives? Again, can we be the mind if it is changing all the time? Now, nothing has been said about observing. This will be left for a later discussion. So let's move on to the next subject, the ego. We are not the ego. But in order to communicate effectively with others, we have to use the word I. But most of us do not think it is used merely as a convenience. We believe we are whatever comes after the word I, like I am sick, or I am feeling great, or I have cancer, or I have a great career, or I have to tell you what happened to me, or I am so amazed, or I would feel terrible if, or the big one, I am in love with so-and-so. We believe that the use of the word I not only refers to something about us, but that it is us. How funny is that? This should be making you laugh. Add to this the fact that most of us believe that we are individual, separate, autonomous entities that have a mind of our own. Of course we would believe that. It's what we've been taught our entire lives. Effectively, we mistake ourselves as something we are not, and that something is always limited. In the Sanskrit language, this is called ahamkara, the word we know of as ego. But ahamkara really means the process of becoming attached to or identifying with that which we are not. That language is beautiful. They have something for everything because they've thought it through. It is this way, this belief, this attachment of the basic feeling of I am to anything that creates duality. Because if I am something, a man for instance, then I have simultaneously defined something I am not, a woman, which results in further separation and, of course, duality. Listening to this, the thought may arise, well, duh, of course I am a man, or of course I am a woman. What else would I be? My point is this. We demonstrate our limits by believing ourselves to be one or the other. Further, we demonstrate our limits by even suggesting that gender is part of the equation of who we are, just as we do with labels that we slap onto people. He's a lawyer, she's a doctor, he's an engineer, she's a politician, as though these labels define us. Come on! Well, we do this because we have been under the spell of the ego since day one. So in an analogous manner, Advaita says that spirit, the higher self, has nothing to do with the world or anything I just talked about, is totally unaffected by it. But the process of ahamkara, that is becoming that which we are not, attempts to identify the higher self with something material like a body. And that something is who we end up believing we are. So for example, when the body dies, all of us mourn the death of that person, Mary, believing that every aspect of her, body, mind, soul, died. But the only thing that died is the physical entity that we call the body. Now, I know some of you listening to this already get this, but there are others who listen to this throughout the week that don't have a clue of this, or this is foreign, or this is scary. Again, we are not the body. We are not the mind, and we are not the ego. The higher self, although seemingly subject to misery and death, is not subject to misery and death because it is not associated with the body or the mind, nor does it subscribe to the process of ahamkara, the ego. Let these ideas rest in the back of your mind for now. Now notice I used two words just now, your mind. Let these ideas rest in the back of your mind for now. I use these two words because even though this is not who we are, this is a word or a phrase we understand, even though the reality of it does not exist. And I personalized it by using the word your. But the mind is not yours. Doesn't this make you laugh? This is funny stuff. I love it. Now let's move on to the next topic of we are not a person. Oh boy. Hope this doesn't deflate your ego. When we say I have a toothache, we are referring to the body. I think that this topic is a bit far-fetched, refers to an opinion. I am going to read this book from cover to cover, implies a reasoned discrimination. Since we've already discussed that neither the body, the mind, nor the ego are real and thus do not exist, then in fact a person does not and cannot exist, because a person is the summation of the body, the mind, and the ego. But let's look at the epistemology of the word person. You're going to love this. It stems from the words persona, 2 words, persona, and refers to the megaphone mask worn by actors in the Greek-Roman theater. Since the performances were in open air without amplification equipment, the mask was a device through which the sound was projected. The mask was a device through, and that's what per means, which the sound, that's what sona means, was projected. Thus the word person was never, ever, ever meant to refer to our true self, but only to the mask we present to others on the stage of life. Does that make you want to laugh or cringe? We have it all backwards. Everything is backwards in this world. Cause is effect and effect is cause, and we accept it. It's interesting that the word has come to mean the exact opposite of what it was originally meant. We really believe we are people, or individually a person. I am a person. We are living a lie, so to speak. We really think we are the mask. This analogy is very similar to the one that describes words. Our main vehicle of communication on this planet. Words are symbols of symbols, twice removed from reality, and therefore the least effective means of communication, yet it is our primary vehicle for communicating. The animals have a higher form of communication than we do because they communicate telepathically. Why is everything so backwards? Because of the ego and our penchant to follow the ego like cattle to a slaughter. Our penchant to be told exactly what to do, which we've lived tremendously during this past year. Getting back to the concept of person, there's no such thing as a person. What we call the person is only the summation of all the limitations, body, mind, ego, with which we have identified through the process of ahamkara. The higher self does not occupy the person. The person is an artificial construct, a bundle of thoughts and feelings, and some matter in mostly fluid form that takes on a particular shape. And as for the ego, it is memories and experiences of the past and hopes and fears of the future. It has no existence in the present. None. Another laughable thing. There is no such thing as a healthy ego, any more than there is a thing called a healthy disease. So why would we associate with the ego and work on building it up in our teenage years? Not only is the ego a fabrication, but we insist upon living in accord with the limitations offered by the ego. Here are just a few of those limitations of the ego. Fear, anger, rage, frustration, negativity, impatience, arrogance, greed, stubbornness, self-destruction, self-deprecation, envy, aggression, shame, non-integrity, depression, guilt, and so on. The ego lives in regret of the past and in fear of the future, yet the vast majority of us humans can't, don't, or won't acknowledge this simple reality. We just keep going on as though this is the only way and something better is going to happen. And there we go. I have not mentioned, by the way, that it is fundamental to the philosophy of Advaita that we cannot be that which we observe. For instance, we see something across the room, it is clearly separate from us by space, and therefore we cannot be it and it cannot be us. I think we would all agree to that. If we see our body, here I am, or here I am, depending on which view you take, and I'm seeing this body. If we see our body, I am in one place, as it were, looking at a material thing in another place. I cannot be it. We see thoughts arising and the mind playing with those thoughts if we are in an observational state such as meditation. Therefore, we cannot be those thoughts or that mind. Whatever we can see or observe objectively, we cannot be that. On those perhaps rare occasions when everything is totally silent, when our eyes are closed so we see nothing, when there is complete peace outside and not a sound to be heard, when our mind is still, disturbed by not a flicker of a thought, who is the witness to this silence? And where does the higher self come into all of this? The higher self is the unattached witness. So how can it be that we can possibly overlook something so fundamental as our real self, our real higher self? Rudyard Kipling wrote a story explaining how it was that the gods, fearing man's imminent realization of his own divinity, hid man's godhead somewhere where he would never, ever find it. Inside. Not inside the body. It is illusory. But inside. Not inside the body, but inside. Go inside and find the answers. Somewhat earlier than Kipling, by a few thousand years, in one of the Upanishads, one of the earliest known books, it says the same thing. God created the senses pointing outwardly. Therefore, one sees the outside world, not one's own nature inside. A wise person wishing to be immortal, however, turns her eyes within and sees the real self. It is incredible how rarely we consider our real self. And practically all we do and think when we speak of I, like I am, or I'm going, or I got to do this, we are really referring to the ego, that illusory aspect of our true nature. It can only speak from habit and stale opinion, from memory and from the past. The higher self, however, is alive and fresh in every moment, if only we would recognize this. In fact, there are just a few moments when most of us will have direct access to this. The most common, without too much effort, usually is upon awakening from deep sleep in the morning. At these times, we may experience what might be called a pure feeling of existence, containing none of the limitations normally associated with consciousness. Unfortunately, this is usually superseded almost immediately upon awakening by a sense of panic as the ego fights to reestablish its hold over our destiny. What day is it? What time is it? Am I late? What's the temperature outside? What's going on in the world? The higher self exists. The ego doesn't in reality. We shouldn't think of ourselves as a thinker, a feeler, or a doer. All of these things happen on this stage of a play called life, but the higher self is not any of them. It is much more, and so are you. There is so much more to tell you, both from the Book of One, The Spiritual Path of Advaita, and from A Course in Miracles. Advaita came about 2,000 to 3,000 years before the Common Era, making it 4,000 to 5,000 years old. A Course in Miracles was introduced in 1976. It is considered New Age, but there is nothing New Age about it. In these two philosophies, we see the threads that have been woven through the fabric of time, and that is that our world, what we call our reality, is in fact an illusion that we want to believe is real. Yet 4,000 years ago, a philosophy sprung up to tell the people back then that this life is but a dream, as there is no reality in bodies, minds, egos, or persons. Now add to that the quantum physics view of the body being 99.999999% space, and we might want to conclude that we need to look at everything we've ever been taught because something is amiss here. So with that, I leave you to ponder all you've heard today. There was a lot presented, but not to worry, as there is a lot more coming. Let's just take a few moments of quiet. Close your eyes. You can either offer forgiveness or just move right into the peace that comes with complete and utter silence.